It's 11:40 on a Tuesday night, and Jem is standing at her kitchen counter wearing a hospital badge she forgot to take off, eating cereal out of a coffee mug because every bowl in the house is sitting in the dishwasher. She's 41. Still open behind her search bar is a tab from 3 hours earlier, where she was comparing prices on water heaters. She types average 401k balance by age, reads the figure for her bracket, and flips her phone face down without finishing the cereal. Trevor is also 41, 2 exits down the same highway. He read that exact same number that morning, felt a small, quiet wave of self-satisfaction, and went out to shop for a grill. Same number, completely opposite Tuesdays. Here's the part neither one of them realizes. That number was never describing Jem. It was never describing Trevor. It isn't describing you either. It's describing somebody who simply doesn't exist. My name is Nick, and today we're going to do the one thing the retirement industry publishes every single year and then very carefully avoids explaining. Let's start with the actual data, because I'm not going to tell you a number is misleading and then refuse to show it to you. Vanguard releases an annual report called How America Saves, built from roughly 4.6 million real accounts. It's about as close as this country gets to an honest scoreboard. The 2026 edition just came out, and the headline figure is $167,970, an all-time high. Flip one page later in that same report using those same accounts, and the median sits at $44,115, nearly 4 times lower. Same data set. And Vanguard doesn't bury this fact. They print it right there. The average lines up with roughly the 75th percentile. Meaning when you measure yourself against the average 401k balance, you're actually comparing yourself to the top quarter of everyone who even has a 401k at all. I want to give this figure a name because it's going to keep reappearing. Let's call him the Phantom Saver. He's who the headline is really about. He isn't the middle of America. He isn't the typical worker. And he doesn't exist. He's a mathematical artifact produced by taking a small cluster of enormous accounts and spreading them evenly across everyone else. And every single year, millions of people measure their real lives against him and walk away convinced they're falling behind. While we're on the subject, keep this in the back of your mind. Somewhere inside your 401k, right now sits a number you almost certainly never chose. Someone else selected it for you probably during your very first week on the job. We'll get to who did that later. It matters more than your actual balance does. So let's walk through the age brackets. To keep this honest, I'm only giving you the median at each stage because the median is the true middle. Half the people above it, half below. A real, actual person stands at that point. Under 25, $2,234. 25 to 34, $18,732. 35 to 44, which is exactly Jem and Trevor's bracket, $46,919. 45 to 54, $78,730. 55 to 64, the last stretch before most people actually retire, $107,269. And then 65 and up, it actually drops to $103,000. It goes down. That's not a mistake in the data. That's people who've stopped contributing and started withdrawing. You fill a bucket for 40 years, and the bucket doesn't get to stay full forever. Now picture the Phantom Saver standing right beside every one of those numbers. Under 25, he's sitting on $7,000 instead of $2,000. 35 to 44, he's got $120,000 against Jem's $47,000. 55 to 64, he's holding $305,000 against a real person's $107,000. He's roughly 3 times wealthier than the median American at literally every age bracket, and he's the one who ends up quoted in the headlines. One more figure from that same report reframes the whole picture. 1 in 4 participants has under $10,000 saved. Only 18% have more than $250,000. So let's run the one conversion that actually matters, and let's run it just once so we're using the same unit for the rest of this video. A balance isn't money. A balance is a promise about future money, and the exchange rate is worse than most people assume. Take that 55 to 64 median, $107,000, and hand it to a 65-year-old looking to buy guaranteed lifetime income. Right now, that buys roughly $670 a month. $670. 30 years of payroll deductions converted into something close to a car payment. And not a nice car either. So from this point forward, whenever I mention a balance, I'll also translate it into what it actually pays monthly, because that's the number you'll genuinely be living inside. And here's what that math feels like from the inside. It looks like a 58-year-old man who's suddenly, strangely curious about his coworkers' retirement dates. It looks like Jem opening that water heater tab, closing it, reopening it, closing it again, and finally just going to bed. Now here's why even those median figures are optimistic. Wildly optimistic, actually. And it comes down to a data problem so basic that once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Vanguard's numbers come from Vanguard accounts. Fidelity's numbers come from Fidelity accounts. Every single one of these reports only measures people who already have a 401k with that specific provider right now. Anyone who never cleared that first hurdle simply doesn't exist in the study. How many people is that exactly? The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that 72% of private industry workers have access to some kind of retirement plan. Access, not participation. And that access swings dramatically depending on company size, 59% at businesses with fewer than 100 employees versus 90% at companies with more than 500. Now look at who actually participates, and that number drops to around 53%. In leisure and hospitality specifically, it's just 17%. The person who made your lunch today almost certainly isn't in this data set. Not because they're careless with money, but because nobody ever offered them the account in the first place. The Federal Reserve confirms this from a different angle. 39% of American adults have zero tax-advantaged retirement account of any kind. The broader survey of consumer finances, which counts every household rather than every account, puts roughly 46% at absolute zero retirement savings. So add those households back into the picture, and the true national median collapses toward something closer to $30,000. That's the real middle of America, not $167,000. And there's a third leak that almost nobody accounts for. The 401k was engineered for a job market that has quietly stopped existing. Median job tenure now sits at 3.9 years. For workers aged 25 to 34, it's just 2.7 years. We built a stay-put savings vehicle and handed it to a workforce that changes jobs every 4 years, then acted shocked at the results. Want to know what happens to those accounts? 31.9 million of them have been left behind at former employers, collectively holding $2.1 trillion, roughly a quarter of all 401k money in the entire country. Average balance left behind, $67,000 each. So your retirement savings might not actually be small, they might just be scattered across 3 former employers, like mismatched socks in a laundromat. Which brings us to Gary. Gary is 62. He's got over $1 million sitting in his 401k. And every single article ever written about people like Gary treats it as a personality trait. Discipline, focus, waking up early. Hold on to that thought, because we're going to examine Gary's actual profile shortly, and it isn't what you've been led to believe. Speaking of things nobody tells you, later in this video I'm going to show you a single retirement account so enormous it makes every figure in this entire video look like a typo. Same account type as yours, same rules on paper. Once you understand how it was built, you'll realize this whole system runs on 2 tiers, and only one of them was ever advertised to the public. But first, the gap, the real one. Median household spending for Americans 65 and older runs about $61,000 a year. Social Security covers roughly $25,000 of that after this year's 2.8% cost of living adjustment. And the median 401k generates somewhere between $4,300 and $5,000 a year, depending on which withdrawal rate you trust. Add it up, roughly $29,000 in income against $61,000 in spending. The median American reaches retirement with less than half of their own expenses covered. That's not a budgeting mistake. You cannot coupon your way across a $32,000 annual canyon. And it gets even rougher. When Americans are asked what they think they'll need to retire comfortably, the average answer comes back at $1.26 million. The median 55 to 64-year-old has $107,000. That's under 9% of their own target, with roughly 7 years left on the clock. Nobody in that bracket is 9% of the way to a solution. They're 9% of the way toward a number they invented themselves, which is arguably worse since they've been measuring the wrong distance the entire time. Here's one more detail almost nobody factors in because it hasn't technically happened yet. The Social Security Retirement Trust Fund is currently projected to run dry by 2032, which triggers an automatic benefit cut of roughly 22% unless Congress intervenes. That isn't speculation, it's arithmetic already written directly into the law, which means that $25,000 in Social Security doing most of the heavy lifting in the average retirement plan is due for a haircut 6 years from now. Here's what all of this actually feels like, because the numbers are abstract, but the experience absolutely isn't. It feels like being 63 and doing quiet math in a parking lot before a dentist appointment. It feels like your daughter asking whether you and your husband are financially set, and hearing yourself answer, "We're fine, honey," in a tone you've clearly rehearsed. It feels like nudging the thermostat down 2 degrees in February and telling yourself it's about the environment. None of that is a personal failing. All of it is residue from a decision made around 1980, when the entire risk of aging got quietly transferred off of employers and onto individual workers, and nobody ever sent out a memo about it. So why does this system leak the way it does? Because it's built to, and because being broke is expensive. Start with hardship withdrawals. In 2021, 2% of participants took 1, then 3, then 4, then 5. In 2025, that figure hit 6%, 4 straight years of increases. Here's the detail that really got me. The median hardship withdrawal is about $1,900. Nobody's rating their retirement account for a boat. 36% of those withdrawals go towards stopping a foreclosure or eviction. 31% are medical. People are using their 401k as an emergency fund because they simply don't have an actual emergency fund. Workers earning under $50,000 are 3.5 times more likely to do this. And when they do, they get hit with a tax penalty on top of it. Congratulations, you've just discovered the surcharge for being broke on the wrong Tuesday. Then there's the cash out. Roughly a third of participants cash out entirely the moment they leave a job. And the median worker changes jobs every 3.9 years. So the core design assumption behind this whole product, that money goes in and simply stays in, gets broken by a third of all customers roughly once every presidential term. Then fees, the quietest leak of all. The Department of Labor's own example illustrates that a single extra percentage point in annual fees can cut your final balance by about 28% over a career. 1% shaving off 28% of your ending total. It's a rounding error that quietly eats an entire house. And then my personal favorite, which is where that mystery number from earlier lives. Auto-enrollment is now mandatory for new retirement plans, and to be fair, it genuinely works, pushing participation from around 29% up to roughly 91%. But the default contribution rate is usually set at just 3%, and people stay parked there indefinitely. 3% plus a 3% match equals 6%, against a target that should be closer to 15%. It gets worse still. Every time you switch jobs, you get reset back to that default. So you spend 4 years climbing your way up to 8%, land a better job with a raise, and get silently dropped back down to 3%. Your income went up. Your savings rate went down. Nobody emailed you about it. There was no announcement. That number, the one someone in HR quietly selected for you during onboarding week, back when you were mostly worried about parking, has silently functioned as your entire retirement strategy ever since. Now, the account I promised you. Back in 1999, Peter Thiel deposited under $2,000 into a Roth IRA, the exact same account type available to any middle school teacher, with the exact same contribution limits printed in the exact same IRS publication. He used that account to buy founder shares for a fraction of a penny each in a company that turned out to be PayPal. By 2019, according to ProPublica's reporting on leaked IRS data, that single account was worth roughly $5 billion. Not tax-deferred, permanently tax-free. And he isn't a fluke. Between 2011 and 2019, the number of taxpayers holding Roth accounts worth over $5 million roughly tripled, climbing to about 28,600 people. 497 of them averaged around $150 million each. Gem has $47,000. She's using the exact same category of account, following the exact same rules under the exact same annual limits. And she's playing an entirely different game on an entirely different board. The retirement system isn't broken. It's functioning precisely as it was designed to. That design just happens to have two tiers, and only one of them ever got a commercial. Now you might be thinking, okay, Nick, but balances hit record highs last year, so clearly the system's working. And you'd be right that they did hit records. Look at why. Vanguard's average balance jumped 13% in 2025, and Vanguard states plainly that this was driven by market performance. The S&P returned roughly 16% that year. Savings rates themselves barely budged, so that record wasn't an achievement, it was a weather report. And weather changes. Total 401k assets nationwide already slipped from $10.1 trillion down to $9.9 trillion by the first quarter of this year, which matters even more once you see what the major firms expect going forward. Vanguard's own model projects annual U.S. equity returns of just 4 to 5% over the coming decade. BlackRock estimates around 5. Research Affiliates puts it closer to 3 against a historical average near 10. I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you that if your retirement projection assumes the last decade simply repeats itself, you're relying on a growth rate that the people who built your own calculator no longer believe in. So what actually moves the needle? 3 things, and none of them are particularly inspiring. First, the match. The average employer match runs around 4.6%. And if you aren't capturing the full amount, you're voluntarily declining the one guaranteed return that exists anywhere in finance. Go check what yours is today, not this weekend, today. Second, that default rate. Log into your account and look at your contribution percentage. If it reads 3%, that number was chosen by a benefits administrator you've never met and never will meet. And right now, it is your entire retirement plan. Bump it up 1 point, bump it again after your next raise when you won't even feel the difference. Third, the contribution limits, which increased for 2026. You can now defer $24,500. 50 and over adds another $8,000. 60 to 63 gets a super catch-up of $11,250. And one correction here, because this keeps getting misreported, that $11,250 replaces the $8,000 figure entirely. It doesn't stack on top of it. Also new this year, if you earned over $150,000 last year, your catch-up contributions have to go into a Roth account. And let me be honest about that last point, instead of pretending it's relevant to everybody. Fewer than 1% of workers earning under $50,000 actually max out their 401k. Meanwhile, 51% of people earning over $150,000 do. Contribution limits aren't really a goal for most Americans. They're a tax planning tool for people who have already won the game. Worth 30 seconds of your attention, sure, but I'm not going to stand here and pretend the ceiling is your problem when the floor is what's actually collapsing. So let's circle back to our 3 people because the right comparison was the entire point of this exercise. Trevor has around $340,000. And here's the part I left out earlier. Roughly half of that sits in a single position, company stock from a decade spent at an employer that eventually got acquired. Trevor didn't outsave Jem. Trevor got handed a decade of luck. He isn't the hero of this story either. He simply happens to be standing in the part of the distribution curve that drags the average upward, which means Trevor's good fortune is actively making Jem feel like a failure. Neither of them signed up for that dynamic. The math did it to both of them. Then there's Gary, our average 401k millionaire, 59 years old, 26 years in the exact same plan, 26 years in a country where median job tenure sits under 4. Gary isn't disciplined. Gary is a survivor of a labor market that has largely stopped producing people like him. And there are roughly 595,000 Garys out of more than 25 million total participants, under 2.5%. We've built an entire genre of financial advice around a group of people who are, statistically speaking, a rounding error. And Jem has $47,000, which places her almost exactly at the median for her age, meaning Jem isn't behind at all. Jem is the middle. She is precisely, unremarkably typical, And she spent a Tuesday night eating cereal out of a coffee mug, feeling like she'd failed at something because a phantom told her she had. Here's what she actually did the next morning, and it took her 4 minutes total. She logged into her retirement account for the first time in about 6 years and looked at her contribution rate, 3%. She had never once chosen that number herself. It had been selected for her during onboarding at a job she left back in 2019, and it quietly followed her into the next one. 11 years of her working life carried a number inside it that she had never once actually looked at, set by someone whose name she doesn't even know. She bumped it up to 6. That's it. That's the entire dramatic turning point of this video. So stop asking, am I behind? That question has no usable answer. The benchmark itself is contaminated. The dataset can't see half the country, and the average is just a phantom, standing at the 75th percentile wearing a name tag that says normal. Ask this instead: what's my actual contribution rate, and when did I last choose it on purpose? Because your balance is a fact about the past, about the market, and about which employer happened to hire you. Your contribution rate is a fact about your own life, and it's one of the very few numbers in this entire system that will actually respond when you touch it. Go look at it today. If it's still whatever number your employer picked for you during week 1, you never actually made a decision. Somebody else made it for you and let you spend a decade quietly assuming it was yours all along. And if you'd rather work through your own numbers alongside people doing the exact same thing, our community is waiting in the description.